Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fuller, you said the safety certification loomed large in your interviews. So under the model I'm hearing here, safety certifications stay with the government. Who would pay for it? The government, I assume? That we get an answer quickly. Yes, government would pay for it. Okay. Is that going to solve the safety? Is that going to solve the certification issue problems?
Actually, I think if you change the culture, you'll go a long way to solving the certification problems. And the $15 billion the FAA spends, most of which comes from people using the system, would be the revenue from which you'd pay for both ATO and
yeah, but no, your model is you move it over, but their model is it stays with the government.
It would. That's as I understand it. Yes, that's
okay.
Correct.
So under and anyone who disagrees, who's advocating the private corporation, the government is going to pay for safety and certification. Okay, quickly, Mr. Poole.
Yes, and this would.
Okay, yes, we got it.
Okay,
we're good.
okay. Yes.
So that's left over here without a funding source. So that's subject to all of the vicissitudes of all the problems we talked about, of sequestration and all that. And certification has been identified as a huge issue. So we would still have to reform that, and we would have to figure out how to fund it. Okay. Let's go on to Airport Improvement Program. Now, I know there's going to be a little difference. It's $3.35 billion a year. About half goes to GA, half goes to commercial. As I understand the model of A4A, we would not fund the commercial side, and you would fund GA out of excess revenues. So you're anticipating excess revenues in the vicinity of $1.6 billion a year. Is that right, Mr. Parker?
I believe that's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. So, and then how are we going to fund the commercial side? As you might have noticed that A4A is a little resistant to PFCs or PFC increase, and we're going to take away AIP, which is $1.6 billion a year. You say they can borrow, but what's their funding stream if they can't have an increased PFC and they lose AIP? And what happens to small and mid-sized airports who would have to charge? I mean, even if they could charge a PFC, it would drive people away. How are we going to pay for that? Or are we going to say the government will continue to pay for AIP? Anybody get an answer on that, Mr. Poole? Is the government going to continue to pay for AIP under your model?
It's certainly up to Congress, but I think...
Okay, so we would have to find $1.6 billion more.
Yes.
We're going to take safety certification, $1.6 billion, but we no longer have the revenue stream because that's gone over here, and we've changed all that. So that's a bit of an issue. Now, Mr. Grizzle, when I talk to you, now, Mr. Rinaldi, I think your folks are kind of in favor of defined benefit plans, right? Yes?
That would be correct.
Are they interested in defined contribution plan as a transition?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Mr. Grizzle, you advocated defined contribution in the future.
Only for new employees hired after the closing date.
So then you're going to create a transition. Let me talk about a transition problem we have. And everybody points to problems with the Postal Service. I've got a reform bill, and the government, Congress is a big problem. And one of the problems is when we transfer just from one government program to another, CSRS to TSP, the Postal Service overpaid, according to consultants, between $9 and $15, some say $20 billion for that transition. They have been unable to get the federal government to honor that and return the money to the Postal Service so it could go into a fund and be used for other purposes. So now we're talking about we're going to bifurcate the system. We're going to transfer government employees to a private corporation, and somehow we're going to fund that, and that's not going to be as problematic as TSP to CSRS, so that'll be easily done. They will somehow continue to earn federal benefits. New people will go into a defined contribution. As the workforce shrinks, there's obviously less and less and fewer people to lobby to continue the defined benefits for the people who are in there, and somehow the private corporation is paying for it. I don't see how that's going to work, but that's just another minor issue. Now, the valuation of assets, this is an interesting one because Ms. Robin talked about the FAA's asset of spectrum. Well, again, as I pointed out, it's the FCC's by the NTIA, and they pay a very subsidized price, $2 million a year to use it. So, and we are selling spectrum at very high prices. Now, we've had some experience. This is the spectrum that's used. The allegation is it's being used very inefficiently, and we can parcel it up and sell some of it off, and somehow those benefits would go to the private corporation and not to the taxpayers of the United States. I think there would be some disagreement in Congress over that. But if you look here, this little dot, that's where Light Squared wanted to go, right here. And then we found out, oh my God, it's going to wipe out our GPS. That's a problem. So it got blocked. Now, actually, this is not being particularly, from experts I've talked to, inefficiently used, plus some of it's intermingled with military, and all of it seems to be vital. Maybe there's some way you can parse it down a little bit, but when we tried to parse it here, people said, oh my God, we're going to lose GPS. So are you anticipating that the government will give the spectrum to the private corporation and allow them perhaps to consolidate some of it and then sell it, and nothing would flow to the Federal Treasury?
No, absolutely not. And if I created that impression, no. That Congress would, it's unfathomable to me that Congress would direct NTIA to do that. The spectrum, by the way, it's not the FCC's, it's the Federal government.
Well, it's the people,
NTIA,
the FCC,
NTIA manages it on behalf of
But if you notice, the most recent auctions are going for 20 times what it was estimated. I mean, this is very valuable.
Oh, no. It's what the FAA has is incredibly
valuable. Then we have the rest of the assets. Can anyone put a value on the rest of the assets? Delta did, but it was a ballpark number. I don't know if anybody else can. On the physical assets?
There are no clear benchmarks that you can look to, but when you take account of the contingent liabilities associated with them, the value may not be that high.
Okay, but we did have a report, Mr. Hampton, isn't it true in Canada they undervalued the asset?
Yes, at the time, the assets were transferred to NAV Canada. They were sold for over $1 billion, but the auditors came 2 years later and found that the assets were sold for 60% less than their true value.
Okay.
So our point
how do
is,
we, I've tried, I've been on resources most recently and spending a lot of time there, and I've tried to do some very meritorious land transfers where the Federal agencies support it, the private entity supports it. We can never get to there because of the valuation issue. How are we going to deal with this? Who's going to value it?
I think it's, we looked at the cost accounting system. We came up with some numbers, and I don't think they're, I don't want to give you an estimate. It's in the billions of dollars at FAA, and I think it would be very important to get an accurate assessment of what the assets would be at FAA before any move would be made.
Just in summary, thanks, Mr. Chairman. We're going to create a new entity that is going to be able to raise an excess of $1.6 billion a year to pay for GA's AIP. We will make the Federal government either pay or not pay continuing commercial AIP, big problem for small and mid-sized airports. And if we don't let the big airports raise their PFC, then, well, they're going to have a big problem too. So we've got that, and we're going to amortize the asset, and we're going to somehow take over the pension plan. And we're going to continue to pay all the current employees with a defined benefit plan under Federal, but then somehow we're going to transition into a Tier 2 of people who are getting defined contributions. I think, Mr. Chairman, there are some issues here that we need to discuss. I don't think we're going to get it done in this hearing, but I would hope we can have some meaningful discussions. I want to make changes and dramatic changes, but the things that people point to here are things that could be solved. We don't have to take a 38-year-old model that's screwed up with the Postal Service. I mean, A, it's not losing money except for Congress, but B, we did give them a bad governance structure. We can figure out these problems and create a real 21st century government corporation that doesn't have all these transition problems. That's my opinion, but I'm keeping my mind open. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.